Welcome, fans, to another edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling. And tonight we are really honored to have a true legend in the world of professional wrestling, along with Olympic weightlifting, strongman competitions, you name it. This man has done it. The legendary Ken Patera, who is going to talk to us about his new book that is forthcoming for pre-order this week. Kenny, welcome to the Great North Wrestling Podcast, sir.
Well, thanks for having me. You know, I've been on with Hannibal or Devin. What does he go by, Devin or Hannibal?
He goes by, wrestling wise, he's Hannibal. His name is Devin, though, so either one works, sir.
Yeah, Devin, nice guy. Really Absolutely. A nice guy. I had the pleasure of talking to him, I think about 2 years ago. And I was doing a meet and greet and autograph session up in Albany, New York with Nick Massey. And he says, "You want to be on Hannibal?" And I says, "What's Hannibal?" I didn't even know. And so he says, "Well, he's up in Canada, up in Toronto. We'll fix you up and, get you some publicity." I says, "Well, that sounds good to me." So that's how I met Devin, and he loved it, Yeah, it's been 2 years now. And then I was on a year ago also. So this will be the third time.
Well, the third time is the charm, and you're certainly a favorite of the viewers of the Hannibal TV, given your other appearances. But I want you right now to, if you can, you've got a copy of the book, which is called Ken Patera, Weight of the World. We'll show the fans the cover, and we'll get into the pre-order information at the end of our interview. But you collaborated with Kenny Casanova and another fella, George Luce, on the project, and I think it would help the fans to know what at this stage of the game created the desire for you to write a memoir, given your extensive careers.
Well, age. I'm almost 80 years old now. And when I did all that stuff, it was back in the, let's put it this way. I was born in 1943 and graduated from high school in 61. And then I went to college. I bumped around, dropped out a couple times, wound up at Brigham Young University and graduated an education degree from Brigham Young. And I never utilized, I shouldn't say that. I did teach for 1 year, but it was so bad. Oh God, I couldn't take it. I had to get out of there, man, I'll tell you. And so anyway, a friend of mine owned a steel warehouse. And he asked me, he says, "You want to come to work for me?" I said, "What? Doing what?" He said, "Either sales or you can run an overhead crane in the warehouse." I said, "Well, shit. Which one am I going to make the most money at?" He said, "Probably running the crane." I said, "I'll run the crane." So I jumped on that, and then I started night school at Portland State University working on a master's degree. Because I wasn't going to teach anymore unless I taught, unless I was a professor at a college. And then the Olympics started to come, get real close. And so I started training for the Olympics and forgot about the college. I said, "I'll come back to it in a few years." Well, I never did come back. That's one of those things. And then my brother Jack, he was coaching for the Minnesota Vikings and in Minnesota, where I once I moved here, I've lived all over the country, but I always kept gravitating back to Minnesota, and that's where I am now. Um, so I just, I like the cold. I don't know why. It's a funny quirk in my head. Uh, After growing up in Portland, Oregon, it rained all the time. I think I got waterlogged. But yeah, it's just one of those things. And then when I was training for the Olympics up here in Minnesota, I bumped into Vern Gagne, through my brother. My brother knew Vern. And he says, yeah, he says, Jack tells me you're going to the Olympics. I said, yeah. He says, what makes you think you're good enough to go to the Olympics? I said, well, I've won at that time 3 national weightlifting championships, broke all the records. All the records are mine. I had just won 4 gold medals in the Pan American Games. The only weightlifter to ever win 4 gold medals in the Pan Am Games. All the records. And so I explained to Vern, I said, I don't anticipate any kind of injury. So I think I'm good. Well, right after the Olympic trials, that's the meet that officially qualifies you for the Olympics. I'm out jogging. I stepped in a damn hole, twisted my knee. My knee goes boom, blows up the size of a basketball. So anyway, I had to have it operated on. Well, that was 11 months before the Olympics when I injured my knee. Yeah, it never healed properly. Even after the operation, if of course, if it happened, when they had arthroscopic or orthoscopic surgery, it would have been fine. But back in 1971, when I hurt my knee, I had a scar on my knee. Where's the camera? About a foot long.
Holy Toledo.
Oh, yeah. God, they butcher you. And then they put a cast on me for 6 weeks. And nowadays they don't even, they close the incision with glue, some kind of glue. So anyway, after meeting Vern Gagne, he says, then he brought his whole family over to Munich to watch me compete. Now, I don't know if they actually got to the weightlifting hall where we were competing, but nonetheless, he brought his whole family over there because of me. And then his son, Greg, he came along with the family. So when after the Olympics, Greg and I went on a whirlwind tour. We went to Vienna, Austria, and Bratislava, Czechoslovakia. Okay, we went everywhere. We even took a boat down the Blue Danube. And, the Blue Danube wasn't real blue. It was muddier shit. And so anyway, we got back here and started training. And before I went to the Olympics, I was living with Ric Flair. And he always wanted to be a wrestler. Oh, God, he hounded me every day for 2 years. And so when I got back, I promised him, I said, we start training camp. I'm going to have Vern Gagne get a hold of you and get you in that training camp. And that's what happened. That's how Rick got started. Because we were living together, we were good friends, So
Yeah, he said in his book basically that when he was starting his career, he wanted to be Ken Patera.
yeah, he loved weightlifting. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
the way we met was kind of, I was looking for a bar. Um, I was living there in Minnesota for about 2 weeks without a whiskey or a beer. And so I asked my brother, I said, is there any bars around here? He said, well, you go over to Excelsior Boulevard, there's nothing but bars. So I went over to Excelsior Boulevard, and first place I saw was George's in the Park. So I walked in the back door there, and there's this blonde kid sitting at a table. And I asked him where the cigarette machine was.
Mm.
Right over there. So as I'm putting two quarters in to get a pack of cigarettes, cigarettes were 50 cents a pack out of the machine. If you went to the store, they were 25 cents. 25 cents. So as I'm pulling the plunger out to make the cigarettes drop out, he taps me on this guy taps me on the shoulder. He says, do you smoke? I said, I smoke and I drink and I do a lot of other things. He couldn't believe it. So anyway, I went into one of the bars there. It was called the Red Dog Saloon. It was a little separate. There was a big uh, um, um, they had a big orchestra and everything. They had everything there. But in the back, they had, they call it a working man's bar. It's called the Red Dog Saloon. And that's where you went to, chew tobacco and hit people and spit on people. I'm not kidding. It was a rough fucking bar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And anyway, about 2 weeks later, I'm bouncing back there. I'm running the damn place. Yeah, or I'm not running it, but I was controlling all the misfits that came in there. I did a pretty good job.
I bet. So Rick wrote the foreword to your book. I understand. How did that come about? Did you call him up, or did he get the word that you were finally putting pen to paper for your memoir?
Yeah, well, the way it came about, we call back and forth. I miss his call, he misses my call, then we call, and then we miss each other again. Boom, boom. It's so ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, we wind up talking a couple times a month, and he called me a couple weeks ago, asked me how things were going, and I said good. But the way that came about, I called Rick, and I says, Rick, I'm writing a book. I said, I talked to Bruce Wilhelm. Uh, if my brother hadn't passed away, I probably would have had him write it, because he was a head coach he was the first head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and he had coached through the NFL off and on for like 24, 25 years. And so anyway, I said, well, maybe I ought to get somebody in the wrestling business to do. And I said, God, who would that be? I said, well, my old buddy Ric Flair. So I called Rick, and he said, oh, John, he jumped all over it. God, he was just tickled. I mean, he was really happy to do it. He said, yeah, I'll do it, And so that's how that came about. I just asked him. Yeah.
Nice. So I wanted to ask you how in the process of preparing to write the book, how did you focus on, because you've had such a tremendous career across several disciplines in addition to pro wrestling, as we touched on earlier. How did you decide on what to include and what not to include with Kenny and George?
That was tough. I'll tell you. I debated, whether to put my childhood in there or not, and some high school stuff, some college stuff. It's kind of, should I just keep it about pro wrestling and the Olympics and the weightlifting, but then I decided to throw some stuff in there, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and then I just rolled it. It just kept building it, until I got to the Olympic Games, and then all the competitions I had to do prior to going to the Olympics. So there was a lot, probably 20 in 4 years. That's a lot for weightlifting.
Mm.
And then after being I was really successful at weightlifting. This fucking asshole Vince McMahon. You know who Vince is?
Absolutely, yes.
I've known that prick since '76. His dad wanted me to come to New York and wrestle for the WWF.
Was that the program with Bruno?
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the first time I went to New York, WWF. Bruno's like a god. I mean, Jesus. I mean, people just fall all over themselves. Bruno. And I never seen anything like that. And so anyway, I worked that program with Bruno. I wrestled him 3 times in Madison Square Garden. Complete sellouts, except the first one is 4 below zero. And that's cold for New York.
Mm.
And the subway trains that come in from Long Island and up north, the railroad lines were breaking, snapping because of the weather. And so the place was sold out. It was over 20,000 people, but only 14,000 people were able to get there because of the cold. And so then the second and the third one were completely sold out. Then after that, we sold out the Spectrum in Philadelphia 3 times, the Igloo over in Pittsburgh 3 times. God, how can I forget the Boston Garden, Beantown? We sold that place out right to the rafters 3 times. Every place we went where we actually wrestled each other 3 times was probably about 7, 8 different arenas, just the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
I never wrestled in any small towns because he had to deal with the promotion in the WWF that he just wrestled the big venues, and so that was fine. I wrestled everything. It didn't matter if there were 50 people or 50,000. And that's how I felt about it, Of course, I was a little younger than Bruno. I think I was 8, 10 years younger. So, yeah. So that makes a difference, especially after Stan Hansen body slammed him on his head, broke his neck. I come in 2 years after that. So that had something to do with it.
When we spoke offline, I think the fans would be interested in your commentary on the fact that when you were an Olympic competitor, you were you said you had to be very squeaky clean, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of fans, and we'll talk about your babyface run, which actually is one of my favorite of all time. But you were a very memorable and believable heel, and you had some insight as to why that was. Can you talk about that to the fans?
As a heel?
Why you clicked so well as a heel?
Oh, well, after being training for 4 years for the Olympic Games, and yeah, it was like walking on eggshells all the time. You had to watch yourself, uh, uh, because you're representing the United States, and so I adhered to all the niceties of athletics, although I still smoked and drank. Not a lot, I wasn't a boozer, but anyway, then I got into wrestling. I was a baby face for, God, I don't know, 4 years, 3 years. And then I was wrestling for Cowboy Bill Watts down in Oklahoma Territory. And that's when I became a bad guy. I had got with a group of bad people. And so anyway, I loved being the bad guy. I said, God, I finally got the shackles off, take the shackles off. And then I don't know if wrestling fans realize this or not, but the bad guy leads the match. And I got tired of these yo-yos. A good guy, they didn't want to do a job, and otherwise they didn't want to lose, and especially if we were near their hometown or they had their girlfriend or mom in the audience. They didn't want to lose, Well, they lost, when they're wrestling me, but I didn't put up with that bullshit, And we're in there, it's a business, So yeah, I loved it, and I developed a swinging full Nelson, the most vicious, violent wrestling hold ever devised. And the reason why it was so violent was once I slapped that full Nelson on an opponent and shake them and start hearing their neck snap, crackle, pop, then I would pick them up and I was swinging. I was swinging them around, anywhere from 3, 5, 6 times. I think I swung one guy about 10 times. And his neck was fucked up for 2 months. Every time he saw me, he said, Kenny, God, you hurt me. You hurt me. I said, no, you hurt yourself.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
We've got a fan question here who wants to know, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but what would it take for you to come back to the WWF, WWE in whatever capacity?
It will never happen. I wouldn't go through that bullshit again for the life of me. No, when I left at the end of '88, I says goodbye to wrestling, and I did wrestle. I wrestled in Germany and Moscow, Russia, and Singapore, Hong Kong, Mexico City. I wrestled all over the world after that, but I picked my shots. I only wrestled 5, 6 times a year after that. Yeah, so I wasn't quite ready to retire completely, but I did retire from the WWF. I'll tell you that. Fucking bullshit. All politics.
Yeah, which we're going to touch on when we talk about your babyface run in '87. But for now, I wanted to ask you about your memories of being part of in the AWA, a member of the infamous Heenan family that I remember quite well as a kid popping for.
Yeah, well, um, Heenan was my manager up here in Minneapolis, the AWA, for a very short time. And then uh, we figured out it'd be better if I was managed by Adnan El Casey, the Sheikh. And he was actually from Iraq. He's from Baghdad, legitimately. And so we had a hell of a run. And then uh, Jerry Blackwell joined the team. So Jerry Blackwell and I beat the High Flyers for the tag team belt. And God, we held them for 2 years, I think. A year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And so that was, I loved wrestling up here for Vern Gagne. I mean, he was a good payoff guy. He only wrestled 15 to 18 times a month. And so that was good. You know, being married and having two little daughters, being on the road every day wasn't appealing to me. Although it did happen, here and there, So anyway, most of those road, when I was in territories that had long drives and stuff, was prior to the birth of my two daughters. Back in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And I had enough of that bullshit.
Absolutely, I can understand that. A fan, Richard, wants to know, basically saying that so much of what Vince McMahon built his empire was on the back of the AWA. A lot of people have that opinion. Is there any way that Vern could have kept you, Heenan, Mean Gene, et cetera, to stem that tide?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little backstory on that. Hulk Hogan was here, and I was wrestling Hulk 2-3 times a week for like 6 months. We were selling out everywhere. And I mean, legitimately selling out, no tickets left in the building. So anyway, Hulk told me that Vince McMahon wanted him to come back to the WWF, and then he put the belt on him. And Bobby Backlund had the belt at the time. And Bobby had been there. He had the belt for 6 years. And but Vince told Bobby, because Bobby told me, he said, yeah, I had a conversation with Vince, and he just came out and told me that I wasn't marketable anymore. That he couldn't find a way to keep the belt on me. And so he wanted to put it on Hulk Hogan. And Hulk told me the same story. And because I was good friends with both of them, And then the Sheik, who went through training camp with Ric Flair, myself, Jimmy Brunzell, Greg Gagne, another kid by the name of Bob Ruggers. The Sheik was bouncing around, not doing a lot, and then he wound up in New York. And I had already left. Because I was in New York 3 different times. And so anyway, I left in the late 70s, like 78. because I was there in 76 and 77. Yeah, then I left in 78 and I went back to Crockett Promotions down in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they were on fire.
Mm.
I mean, they were doing box office. They were doing as well as New York was. And so, anyway, I was one of the top heels there, along with Ric Flair. And Ricky Steamboat was one of the top baby faces. Wahoo McDaniel was, and so I mean, we had a killer group down there. And so anyway, so going from the AWA, like I say, I had already been in New York twice, and then I went back in New Year's Day, 82, I think it was. Yeah, New Year's Day. And that's when Vince was bringing in Hulk Hogan and the Samoan boys and a few other guys. And then shortly after that, Jimmy Snuka and Don Morocco and, the whole face of the WWF was changing. And I knew all these guys, and I'd worked with them down in Charlotte. I worked with them up here in Minneapolis in AWA. And it was right after I started wrestling in January 73, or the latter part of 72, December. That's when Morocco and Jimmy Snuka came in from Portland, Oregon, and my hometown. All those years I never wrestled in Portland except for one time, and it was right at the end of my career when I was still with the WWF. And everybody said, "God, why didn't you ever wrestle in Portland?" I said, "Because Don Owens, the promoter, told me that he couldn't pay me enough." And he was honest, and because I was wrestling nothing but big territories, like the Mid-Atlantic and Charlotte and WWF out of New York and AWA out of Minneapolis up here. I live about 100 miles north of Minneapolis now. I'm up here in God's country.
So is there anything that Vern could have done to stem the tide against Vince with talent rating?
I'm sorry, I got away from that.
Oh, no worries.
No, because Vince flew out here to Minnesota, out to the airport in Bloomington, Minnesota, and had Hulk meet him at the Marriott Hotel, right next to Mall of America. I think everybody knows Mall of America. And they had a long talk. And Vince says, Vince, I really like it here. I really like the AWA, great talent here and everything. And then Vince sweetened the pot. I'll put the belt on you. I'll guarantee you over $1 million a year. I mean, what the hell? And and then after that, Vince talked to Mean Gene Okerlund, the announcer, who carried a lot of weight, took him away from Vern, talked to Bobby Heenan, got Bobby Heenan out of here, and Jimmy Brunzell. And like I said, I had already been to WWF twice, prior to going back myself. And so Vince didn't really have to talk to me. But I called Vince one day and I says, I think it's time for me to come back. he says, well, we have a good place for you starting in, so I think that was January or February, whatever it was. And he says, can you hold off until end of April? He says, I have a beautiful plug you right into program and everything where you start off making a ton of money. And I says, yeah. I says, I'll hold off to that until then. And so I had a chat with Vern into March. You know what that prick said? He says, well, Kenny, how long have you been here now? I said, 2.5 years. He said, 2.5 years, really? He said, God, that's quite a while. I said, well, I said I could still stay, I guess. He says, well, were you thinking of leaving? I says, yeah. I says, I'm going to go back to the WWF. Oh, my God. Yeah, because he had mortal enemies with Vince at that time. And but that's a couple of years before all the shit really hit the fan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was in 79. Yeah, 79. And no, I was going to Crockett Promotions, excuse me, the old NWA down in Charlotte. And but I had talked to Vince. And so, you know, I always stayed in touch with him, you know, stayed in good terms with him, especially his dad, because his dad was still running the place. And then I came back here after Charlotte in 81. That's what it was, or 82. And then it was 84. Yeah. Okay. Get the dates right in my head. And then I talked to Vern about, you know, either staying or leaving. You know, that's when he got about, how long you been here? You know, 2.5 years. Oh my God. Well, where do you plan on going? I said, well, last time I left here, I went to Charlotte. So this time I'm going back to New York. Well, you've been in New York before. I said, yeah, I've been there twice. I said, I really like New York. And he says, well, whatever, you know. So that was 82. And so, or was that 84? No, shit, no. I'm trying to get the dates right in my head. That was
83-ish?
84.
84, 83, 84.
Yeah. And yeah, 84. That's when Hulk. Well, when did Hulk get the belt?
84.
Okay. My old scrambled head.
No. One of the fans on social media just around this time frame sent a question to ask you about the very infamous angle where yourself and John Studd cut the hair of Andre the Giant, and what that was like, given his reputation for being somewhat ornery if he didn't like you.
I was real good friends with Andre. Andre, we went out to eat all the time. When we were in Japan together, he wouldn't let me buy a meal, and we were out every night. You know, oh yeah, I was good friends with Andre. And in the beginning, he liked John Studd, but then John started acting like a fucking giant. You know, he got on that growth hormone and grew 3.5 inches. That's when he was in his mid 30s. I didn't know anybody could grow in their mid 30s, you know, maybe in their early 20s. He took so much growth hormone. Well, he killed himself. And I told him, I said, you stay on that growth hormone and all those steroids you've been on for the past 5 or 6 years, you're going to wind up dead. And he did wind up dead. So anyway, but anyway, that angle was so hot. I was making 35,000 a month.
Wow.
You know, for back in those days, that was crazy money. And I even had some months where I was over in the 40s. And then I got in trouble with Saito here in the AWA with those cops. Well, then the trial comes, and I was in the WWF. After 6 or 7 months, I had to go to trial. And those fucking assholes, that judge and DA, they were both up for re-election. And they just buried me, And I wind up with the best lawyer in Wisconsin, supposedly, but he had turned into a cokehead. He was addicted to cocaine. I had no idea. Nobody knew. And so he was always late for court, like a half an hour to an hour late every morning. And the judge says, I don't even remember the asshole's name. That's how pissed I got. I did. Anyway, the judge found me and Saito guilty. And I had another judge here in Minnesota, in St. Paul, Minnesota, tell me, he said, well, don't worry about it, Ken. You'll get a $300 fine and maybe 30 days. Those assholes gave us 2 years, $50 fine, and 2 years in prison in the big house with many windows and many doors. And man, I was pissed about that. And so anyway, when I got out, I went back to work for Vince. And Saito came back to the AWA here in Minnesota. And I told Saito, I said, I'm going to go to the WWF. Do you want to come with me? No, I'm going to go. My girlfriend's lives in Minneapolis. I'm going to go back to wrestle for the AWA. I said, okay. And that's how that worked out. But that haircut deal was so fucking hot, especially with Heenan, and John Studd didn't have any heat on him until then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but I'm the one with all the heat. And so anyway, then I had to go to trial, got convicted, and went to prison. So go ahead.
So then this is an aspect of your career that I remember fondly as a kid, and that's when you got out. They released WWF released the Ken Patera story. You were on the magazine, and you had this really memorable debate with Bobby Heenan.
Oh,
that we still quote to this day. I just wanted to know who came up with that idea, and then how hot that program was when you were running through the Heenan family.
Yeah, that was hot. Jesus Christ. Well, I was talking to Vince, Bobby and I, we're talking to Vince, and I think Heenan sets up. What do you guys think of doing a debate? And at the end of the debate, we'll do something. I said that's good. Vince loved it. Then, of course, Vince put his stamp on it and said that it was his idea. Fucking promoters. But anyway, then the belt thing didn't come up until we were in the locker room getting ready to go do the debate. He says, and I didn't want to do it. I was afraid I might hurt him. So anyway, he said, no, I'll come and whip your ass. You just turn me around, smack me a couple times. He said, lay him in. I fucking laid him in. And so I got the belt around his neck and drug him out and boom. And away he goes. He was airborne. And I thought for sure that he was going to go over the top rope. I said, God, is he going to come down or not? So boom, people went nuts. And that was good shit. And then, the Heenan family, Harley Race, Hercules, who are the other guys in there?
Towards the end, Rick Rude.
Was Rick in there?
I believe so, yeah. Memory serves me.
Rick, was Bundy in there?
I don't think so at that time.
No, I don't think so at that time.
I wanted to ask you about the verbiage in that debate is so memorable today. As one of the fans, Marty, pointed out when Bobby said all you cared about was pressing weights, and now all you're good for is pressing license plates.
Yeah.
And you want a belt? I'll give you a belt. And was that? Did Bobby lay that out ahead of time, or was that just on the fly sort of thing?
It was on the fly.
Wow.
Because I wasn't expecting that, and so just improv, and it just worked out fantastic. So he's whipping me with that fucking belt. I mean, he was laying him in. I said, son of a bitch, He said, take the belt away, put it around my neck, And so everything was on the fly. Just we had no time to think about doing anything. Got the belt around his neck, boom, Yeah. Things work out better when you do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
You sit around, plan shit, and it never goes accordingly. Yeah.
And they certainly don't do storytelling. I mean, we're still talking about this how many years later about what a memorable angle that was.
Yeah. What was that? 87?
87. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's that? 36 years ago. 36 years ago. And I'm only 29. How in the hell does that work out? Jesus Christ.
Amazing.
And then I look back, all the guys I worked with and partied with, they're all dead now. Yeah.
Sad.
Drugs, car accidents, all kinds of shit. Heart attacks.
Well, it's a very difficult business. I wanted to ask you though, around this red hot period, you suffered an injury to your bicep, and then what appeared to be a push for you to be the WWF World Champion. Kind of it to me, even as a viewer back then, your push really cooled, and you ended up being used almost in a lower mid card capacity. What exactly happened there to have you almost at the top of the mountain and a huge amount of fan support, and then it seemed like they really cooled you off.
Yeah. And then I got pissed. I got despondent. And I said, fuck this wrestling business. I don't want to be in it anymore. Pat Patterson, he was in the office, as a booker. And he came to me one day and he says, Kenny, he says, Vince is kind of, really upset that you keep getting injured. And I had a couple injuries. I fucked my ankle up real bad where I couldn't stand on it for about a week and a half. And then I blew my pec out, and it's just everything was going south. And Vince says, God, he doesn't know if he can have you work main events anymore, especially with a belt, because you're injury prone. Mm. And I says, well, if he feels that way, maybe, and I snapped the tricep off or my left arm, had the pectoral injury along with the arm. I fucked my arm up at the same time, and the ankle, and I says, I told Pat, I said, I don't know if I even want to be in this business anymore, especially the way Vince is treating me now. This is about 2 months into that downhill slide. And I says, I've made up my mind. I don't want to be here anymore. He says, in wrestling? I says, yeah, I don't want to be here in the WWF. I don't want to be anywhere where there's wrestling. I says, I realize I'm an educated guy. It's a big world out there. And I think I can do real well in it. He says, really? I said, yeah. I said, fuck this wrestling. I said, I'm not into it anymore. I'm going through a divorce. And if the promoter doesn't have enough faith in me to keep pushing me, I said, I'm still an asset. An asset. He's treating me like a fucking liability. Vince was. And then they started cutting my pay. Instead of making 15, 20, 30,000 a month, I was making 10% of that. Going through a divorce, still have bills. And I just said, fuck it. I said, I'm done with it. So that was it. Yeah.
So you fulfilled your commitments and put over a bunch of guys, culminating in the Survivor Series, and then you returned to the AWA in about 89, I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong.
89. Yeah.
89, and you worked a program with Larry Zbyszko, who's been on the Hannibal TV. I've had the pleasure of interviewing, and team with Brad Rangans in the Olympians team, and you worked against a young Destruction Crew team of Wayne the Train Bloom and Mike Enos. So
yeah,
you were still on national TV. It was on ESPN. It aired up here in Canada on TSN, but
yeah.
What was the we all know the company was in some dire straits then. What was the atmosphere like when you were working for Vern then?
The AWA was a sinking ship. When I came back here, I opened up a health club, which turned out to be really lucrative for 9 years. I made a ton of money out of that thing. And that was always kind of a dream of mine, opening up a health club. Because, I was a gym rat my whole life, shit. And So Wahoo McDaniel called me from the wrestling office. He said, Kenny, how you doing? It's Wahoo. I said, yeah, Wahoo, how in the hell you been, man? He said, good. He said, wrestling's not like the old days. It's a dying business. I said, dying. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, here in the AWA, Vern's so fucked up, he won't listen. And Ray Stevens and Wahoo were booking the AWA at the time. He said, Vern won't listen to anybody. He has all the answers. And the fucking ship, each week, you could see it go down and down and down a little bit more and then down. And he says, anyway, I was wondering if you wanted to come to work for us. I said, well, I will, but I can only work once or twice a week. He started laughing. He says, fuck, that's all we do. Some weeks we don't work at all. A good week we work three times, but most of us once or twice. We're wrestling in little high schools, grade schools, playgrounds, wherever we can set up a ring and hope that more than 50 people show up. And I said, okay, I'll do it. I says, but I'm not going to work more than once or twice a week. He says, no, you got my word on that. I don't even have to go out and make sure you don't do that. So we were doing TV down in Rochester, Minnesota. And that's famous for the Mayo Clinic, for people that might not know. But anyway, we're doing TV down in Rochester, Minnesota. And it's only 60 miles south of Minneapolis. So we drive down there, So Brad Reagan's needed a knee injury or a knee surgery. And he says, Kenny, I'll do this TV show against, was the Bad Company, I think, was the tag team that we worked with. Paul Diamond, I think, and
Pat Tanaka.
Yeah, Pat. And so we beat them for the belts. And 2 days later, Brad was in the operating room getting his knee fixed. And Brad was a hell of an amateur wrestler. If Jimmy Carter hadn't canceled the 1980 Olympics, Brad would have won the gold medal. And I'll tell you why. The two guys that won the gold and the silver, but Brad beat those guys so bad they were looking for a bed sheet to crawl under. And so he would have whipped their ass good. But anyway, so Brad never got to go to the Olympics. He was on the Olympic team, but they never went. Nice guy, Brad. Brad's a good guy. And so anyway, we were on ESPN, was it? And and I says, well, Brad, if I can't have you as a partner, I'm going to quit too. So a couple of days later, I called Wahoo and told him, I says, tell Vern that I'm going to wrap it up. And then a couple of weeks later, he calls me back. He says, hey, we got this great new TV format. We wrestle, but there's no audience. They pipe the sound in, and the audience will put a facade of some kind up. And so I went over there and looked at it. Sergeant Slaughter had just come back. Sergeant Slaughter's from Minneapolis. And so he'd come back, and I just I looked at that. I saw the format and the way it was laid out. It was the shits. It was the screaming shits. And I think the company completely folded shortly after that.
Yeah, a far cry from the glory days. Got a fan question. Pepper Joe wants to know, what's your opinion on the state of wrestling today, without heat, without kayfabe, and with all the scripted interview stuff? And I think he's talking about the major companies, the WWE and AEW.
It's the shits. It's the screaming shits. Yeah, I don't watch that shit anymore. I mean, a lot of those younger guys, they're great talents, but no direction. They were never really. They were taught to bounce around like acrobats, and that's all you get. You don't get a storyline. During the match, it's all dependent on who can give the ultimate suplex or body slam off the top rope, or goofy stuff. Those guys doing cartwheels and flapjacks and it's a screaming shits. Now, but Brock Lesnar does a pretty good job. Brad Reagan's trained him.
Mm-hmm.
I met him when he was breaking in back in, what year was that? 2000?
In and around there, yeah.
Yeah, 99, 2000, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my own wrestling promotion up here in Minnesota at the time. I was just, they're all benefit type shows. And I'm doing a lot of casinos and colleges and stuff. And I was really doing well. And then I had a training camp for 3 years. And I ran about 50 guys through that training camp at either 3,000 or 3,500 a piece. And then I ran enough shows every year where I could pay those guys anywhere from 75 to 150 bucks a piece. So actually they made their money back, or a lot of their money back. And so I treated the guys good. They all, there's four or five of them that I still stay in touch with. Yeah, Rookie Sensation, Dakota Kid, Street Fighter. There's a couple other I can't think of. Well, Miss Natural. I had a good stable. Yeah, it was very good. And then after I closed up shop, I had been talking to Harley Race, and he had a wrestling school down in Missouri. And a lot of my guys went down there. They loved working for Harley, because Harley and I both ran the same type of school, So
old school, as they say. One of the fans on Facebook sent a question that I'm sure you probably have some insight on, and they want to know, what was it like in the early 90s working for Herb Abrams in the UWF?
Oh God,
his UWF.
I forgot all about that. He had Bruno come out and do some announcing, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
Anyway, I think I worked for him 3 or 4 TVs out in Los Angeles. So I had to fly out there and put up with all that nonsense. And Herb, just a little tiny guy, a Jewish guy from New York City. And I think he was a tailor. And he had a bunch of stores that, tailor-made suits and all that stuff. There's good money in it because he had made a lot of money. But then he got into the cocaine. And Brian Blair was working in wrestling for him and then working in some kind of capacity with him. And Brian says, every show that we had, every TV production, Herb Abrams, he would rent a limo and he'd load it up with girls and cocaine. I didn't know that. Brian told me that about 15 years ago, way after the fact. And I said, Brian, if I knew that, I probably would have hung out a little longer. And he said, oh, yeah. He said that Herb was a party animal. And that's why he lost the business. He didn't know anything about the wrestling business. And he was hiring people. And then he wouldn't listen to them. He thought he knew it all. And it went right down the drain. So,
with his famous, infamous end, apparently covered in cocaine and naked and in a hallway or something like that, something along those lines. I believe the story was.
That's how he went out, right?
Yeah. It's become an urban legend now at this point in time. But yeah, that's why did you only have a limited run there?
Well, that's after 3 shows, I couldn't take it anymore. I said, that's it. It's stupid. Yeah, or after 3 TVs. I don't think we ran any shows. Did he wind up running some shows?
Yeah, he ran some very big venues for pay-per-views that didn't exactly even come close to breaking even.
Yeah. Well, I saw that he was so out of control, didn't have a clue about the business, and I knew he wasn't going to last. So I said, hell with it.
Understand.
What year was I out there?
I think it was about 1992 ish.
Okay, I still had my gym. I had my gym from 89 to 90, first of 98. And then I closed the gym up, and for multiple reasons, I'm not even going to get into it. And then I says, I'm going to get back in the wrestling business. And that's what I did. And I'm glad I did. I mean, I had a 3-year run that was unbelievable. Yeah. So.
Well, Ken, we have time for one more fan question. Ivan wants to know why you never worked in Puerto Rico for Carlos Colon and World Wrestling Council.
Real simple. Gorilla Monsoon had owned a percentage of Puerto Rico with Carlos. And Gorilla and his wife adopted a little Puerto Rican boy there in New York. Well, that little Puerto Rican boy went back to Puerto Rico and got in with Colon. And the next thing I know, Bruiser Brody went in the shower and that little motherfucker put the knife to him. killed him in the shower.
Invader.
Huh?
The fellow's name was Invader.
Oh, is that what his name? But I remember his real name. What the hell was his real name?
I think it's Jose Gonzalez, if memory serves me correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Jose Gonzalez, that little pimple faced motherfucker. And another thing, that's why I never went to Puerto Rico. Because Frank Goodish, Bruiser Brody, was a very dear friend of mine. I helped break him in the business down in Texas when I was down there. We got on the highway together all the time. And he asked me to stay at his grandmother's house whenever I was in San Antonio, which I did. She had passed away a few weeks before that, and he didn't want anybody to break in the house and fuck things up,
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed in that house every Wednesday until it was sold, about a month and a half. Yeah, he really appreciated that. And I said, no problem. I said, I'm glad to help out. And yeah, a little fucking Jose Gorilla Monsoon, he was like the booker back in those days. And so Jose wanted to break in. So Gorilla got him trained in and everything. And he was going to have a TV match with Ken Patera. Well, he was scared to death of me. And that was before all this shit went down, And so he come in the locker room and says, Ken, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. I said, what do you mean don't hurt you? I said, fuck. And then Monsoon come in and give the finish. He didn't want to do a job for me on TV. Can you imagine that, the little motherfucker? I said, so you don't want to do it? Yeah, I said, you don't want to get hurt? I said, with fucking attitude like that, you're going to get fucked up, man. Oh, well, I didn't mean to. So he was apologizing all over the place. So we went out and had like a 1-minute match. He didn't want to do a job for me. I was the top fucking guy in the company. Oh, fuck.
Well, that certainly makes sense why you wouldn't want to work there. The fans are asking Ken about your book in terms of the pre-order. Maybe you can show it again. I personally can't wait to read it. It's Ken Patera, Weight of the World, with Kenny Casanova and George Luce.
Yeah.
According to my information, it can be pre-ordered at, and we'll put this in the description of this interview, WOHW.com.
Okay.
Is there another location or anything that you can direct the fans to?
Yeah, well, my you can put my email in there, Ken Patera 43 at gmail.com.
So that's Ken Patera 43 at gmail.com.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Ken, I must say this interview has been one of my absolute favorites. Looked up to you as a kid, not only as a vicious heel, but a very accomplished like that. That's the Baron, right? The Claw.
He gave me permission 20 years ago to use his claw on anybody that got mouthy with me.
That's awesome. And what a devastating maneuver it was. And I would encourage all the fans, again, we'll put the links in the description to check out your forthcoming book. Is there anything that you'd like to say to the fans of the Hannibal TV before we close?
Oh, yeah. I love the people in Canada. My favorite city up there was Winnipeg. We wrestled in Winnipeg every month when I was with the AWA when I first started back in 73 and 74. I loved going to Winnipeg. And another favorite is Toronto. I wrestled up there for Frank Tunney at the Maple Leaf Gardens. I was probably up there 5, 6, 7 times a year when I was wrestling out of New York for the WWF. Vince McMahon and Frank Tunney were close friends. And I had met Frank. You know, he was an old-time promoter. And his office right on the corner of in the same building as Maple Leaf Gardens. And God, I love Montreal, although I didn't go there very often, but I did wrestle Andre the Giant there at the Forum. We had almost 20,000 people slammed into that place. And I'll tell you a funny story. Andre and I were wrestling, you know, doing all kinds of stuff. All of a sudden, he says, slam me, slam me. I said, are you sure? Yeah. I picked him up, gave him a body slam right in the middle of the ring. You could hear a pin drop. Complete silence. I said, oh, fuck. We're going to have a riot here. The riot didn't start for another 10 minutes. But he was near the rope. Yeah, he rolled over a couple times, so he'd get near the rope. I covered him. He pushed me off. I took a bump through the rope onto the floor. And I get back in. And about 3, 4, 5 minutes later, I said, slam me, slam me. So he picks me up, body slams me, you know, right next to the rope. And he covers me. Referee goes 1, 2, I kicked out, and that big bastard went through the middle rope all the way to the floor.
Wow.
And oh yeah, we just tore that place down. I mean, we tore it down. Like I say, after the match, we had a fucking riot. And,
yeah, they said if Andre liked you, he'd really go that extra mile to make you look like $1 million.
We were good friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Andre and I were real close.
Well, Ken, I'd like to once again thank you for your time. Love to have you back again. I feel like I've only scratched the surface, and we're going to encourage all the fans to check out your book.
Absolutely. Let me get that up again.
Yes, sir.
Ken Patera,
Weight of the World.
World's Strongest Wrestler.
Absolutely. As a shoot.
I'm going to sign off this way. Win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat.
Thanks very much, Ken. And fans, that's been an epic edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. We'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.